I think the weather has caused some issues in terms of attendance, and one of my partners and speakers is on her way here on a bus. But we wanted to get started so that we aren't too delayed in terms of the overall programming. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to an amazing day with the Global Fine Art Awards. A welcome on behalf of K&L Gates. I'm Desiree Moore. I'm a trial attorney. I work out of our Chicago and Doha offices. My practice focuses on what I like to describe as creative industries, so social media, intellectual property, art, and most recently, the cryptocurrency space. So I'm lead counsel on a high-profile cryptocurrency litigation that's pending across the country, which segues nicely into our panel today. But before we get there, I just wanted to say thank you to Judy Holm of Global Fine Art Awards for her vision and for creating kind of an educational component to what the Global Fine Art Awards does. I'll let Judy speak to that, but briefly, GFAA recognizes the best curated art and design exhibits around the globe, and it was Judy's idea that in addition to the gala, which is this evening, and I know many of you are attending, that we do an educational program that highlights some of the other aspects of kind of this concept of global fine arts and recognition of art and design. There's also a conversation to be had about the impact on the law, the impact on culture, the impact on the environment, and more. So we're so pleased to be co-hosting with Judy and with GFAA. Quickly, a thank you to John Bix, who I don't see, but he's the administrative partner here in New York, who generously offered the space that we could do this program. Thank you to Thomas Dollar and Dora Georgescu for all their work in pulling off this morning's panel programming, and Laura Chang as well, who is overseeing all of the administrative stuff, and you saw her when you checked in. A huge thank you to my colleagues and partners, Frederica and Tony, who will introduce themselves in a moment. But again, just to circle back, thanks to Judy for her tireless work on everything. Well, all right, okay, so not tireless, for her tired work on this programming, and we're delighted to be here today. Our panel in particular will focus on the intersection of blockchain and cryptocurrency on the art market, and we will do an overview of blockchain and cryptocurrency before that, which I know many of you are eager to hear about. So with that, I will turn it over to my partners, and we'll jump in. Oh, and I did say that one of our partners was delayed, so we'll buy a little bit of time while she's on a bus on her way here, but we hope she can join us as well.
Great, thank you, Desiree. So my name is Friederike von Brühl from our Berlin office, and my background is I'm a litigator in the art and IP world, and I have litigated a number of cases on forgeries, on restitution. I'm originally also an art historian, so my role on this panel will clearly be to speak kind of from the background of knowing the art market very well. And whereas Tony and Judy are the real blockchain experts, but I had the impression when arriving here yesterday, in fact, when I went after a very jumpy flight to U.S. immigrations, I was just telling Tony about this nice experience I had. There was this guy sitting, asking the standard questions. So, what did you came here for? And I'm for business. And what kind of business is it? Yeah, panel debate. And what's the topic of the panel? Blockchain in the art market. And so he went all crazy. Oh, for the art market, this must be so important. Will there be a sort of title registry? This must change the entire role of provenance in the art market. So I'm clearly expecting, if people are so educated about this in the US, that this audience here must be even more educated. And I wonder whether our panel is really necessary. But I hope it is interesting for you. And now let's get started Tony and Judy will tell us, hopefully Judy too, will tell us on the miracles of blockchain technology, what it's really about. I will, and there are many great things about blockchain technology that can impact the art market, like storing information of art on artworks, helping artists to manage their rights, to manage their estates, setting up catalog resumes, all these things. But by far the most interesting and most far-reaching implication I think this blockchain technology will have for the art market, and that's what the guy at the Immigration Authority immediately understood yesterday, is certainly the impact it will have on the role of provenance in the art market. And provenance in the art market, so the history of an object of art within the art market, the ownership chain of an object of art, that's an issue that has caused issues since the very early beginnings of the art market. It's as old as an issue as the art market itself. Why, I would like to explore with you, why is blockchain technology, why is provenance so important in the art market, and why will why will it be so revolutionary for the art market if with blockchain technology we can, in the future, trace back the provenance of artworks and really get a clear transparency into this title chain in the art market?
Remote control, if you want to move your slides, is right next to you.
Yes, thanks. So to start with, provenance is a key value factor, not only for art, but also for all and any items that are being collected. So obviously it does make a difference whether these glasses here are just some ordinary glasses from the 1960s or whether they are glasses that have formerly belonged to John Lennon. But provenance is more than just a value driver. Provenance is about the history and in the end, about the identity of our cultural treasures. And in the art market, if I speak about the art market now, I mainly mean the secondary market. In the primary market, obviously, provenance plays a different role because objects come directly out of the artist's studio into the market, and as fresh contemporary art, I mean, you can't have any better provenance than that coming right off the artist's studio. So the issue arises in the secondary market. And in the secondary market, you have that problem that the object has already gone through several hands, it already has a history, and you do not know that history. And that can trigger what I would like to call here the three nightmares of the art trade. So what are those three nightmares? The first nightmare, obviously, is title issues. Second, authenticity issues. And issues with cultural heritage regulations. Essentially, all these three nightmares result from a lack of knowledge about the provenance of artworks. And let me give you some examples. Now, let's start with nightmare number one, title issues. You can have the most fantastic painting by Henri Matisse, excellent condition, excellent quality, not the slightest doubt about authenticity, and yet, if it has the wrong provenance, you do have a problem. And in the case of this Matisse here, we are facing the problem of Nazi-looted art. In fact, this was one of the most spectacular cases of the past years. Most of you will have heard about the Golded Art Trove in Munich, 1,248 works of art that were found in a Munich apartment in 2012 that had been hidden there by the Golded family since World War II. And you can see here the first painting of this collection that has been restituted to the ears of the former owners. It's one of 8 paintings or 8 works of this collection that have been officially confirmed to be Nazi-looted art. In fact, the initial headlines read as if all these 1,248 works were Nazi-looted art. In fact, they were not, but the research is still ongoing. For the moment, only 8 works have been identified of this collection as Nazi-looted. Apart from such historical title issues, I would like to give you a second example of title issues, a more contemporary one. This is one of the paintings that were sold here in New York about 10 years ago by Salander O'Reilly Gallery. Back then, it was a big scandal. Gallerist Lawrence Salander had defrauded many of his customers. In fact, he had sold the same artworks several times to different persons. And this, of course, caused conflicting ownership claims by customers, by consignors of the gallery, and it was uncertain who was actually in the end the owner. Now, what I'd like you to think of, we will, of course, go into more detail in the second part of the presentation, but what I'd like you to think of is now how fundamentally situations like these would change if we had a technology where there is a sort of ledger that records and memorizes and documents every single transaction for a particular object. So a situation like this, where someone pretends to have title and does not have title, will essentially not be possible anymore. And these kind of, so these modern kind of title issues, where someone is defrauding others, those will clearly be much, those who will try to defraud others will have a much harder time. Now, let's go to the second nightmare of the art trade, and that's authenticity issues. This example is one that's particularly close to my heart because I've litigated more than 4 years about this painting until my clients finally got their money back. And the funny thing about this painting is that, it was a record-breaking painting in Germany. It was the most expensive painting sold at auction in Germany in 2006. And it was supposed to be by Heinrich Campendonck, the German expressionist. It is until today the most expensive painting that has ever been sold of that artist. So the second most expensive painting in his record list is an authentic one, and this one is not. So this was a painting by German art forger Wolfgang Beltracchi. Here in New York, you had the Knödler scandal. In Germany, we had the Beltracchi scandal. And why was this forger so successful? Well, again, provenance. He successfully invented a historical collection. In fact, he pretended that his wife's grandfather had been a collector in the 1920s, 1930s. And very intelligently, he did that, he had bought his collection in the 20s and early 30s, so right before the Nazis came, so that people wouldn't do the research on the, Nazi-looted provenances. Provenance research in auction houses relates mainly to the time between 1933 and 1945. So it was a very cleverly invented provenance for German expressionists where the Nazis had destroyed many works, so there were many gaps in the catalog raisonnés, and he filled these gaps. There is in the catalog raisonné of Heinrich Campendonck, it says there is a red painting with horses, and he kind of invented the red painting with horses. So this case was all about provenance, and people believed him. Once he succeeded in convincing them that there had been this historical collection, then it made his success, and for 12 years he could go on and sell paintings up into the highest registered parts of the art market. Coming to my second example on authenticity, again, also an example I brought from Germany. Authenticity, in fact, cannot only be an issue for the buyer of a painting who buys a forgery, but it can also be an issue for the seller. Of something, and what do I mean by that? I'm speaking about sleepers. Now, what are sleepers? Sleepers are works of art or other works that are kind of sleeping beauties. Nobody knows really what they are, and nobody recognizes what they are. And then at some point it turns out that they are something entirely different than expected, and that they are actually an object that has a very high value. And that's what happened exactly with this carpet here. It was sold in 2009 in a small regional auction house in southern Germany. Auction catalog said antique, Persian, 800 euros. And then, the consignor was very happy when the price all of a sudden went up to 20,000 euro. The happiness didn't last. 6 months later, the carpet was consigned to Christie's in London. This time, the catalog description was a bit more detailed. It was a vase carpet of Southeast Persia from the mid-17th century, which, as such, is already something quite special, but also the provenance had been identified, and was a carpet that had belonged to a very famous collection from Comtesse de Behag. And at Christie's, the carpet fetched 7.5 million euros. Until today, it's the most expensive carpet that has ever been sold. Now, what do we learn from this? Again, provenance is everything. It's the key not only to ownership, to understand the ownership of an object, but it's also the key to understand the identity, the authenticity of an object. And for the art trade, a lack of provenance information can mean that you simply do not know what you're buying or selling. Let me get to nightmare number 3, cultural heritage regulations. Now, as many of you might be aware, there are, especially in source nations, so those nations that have a very rich cultural heritage and where antiquities might be excavated, there are regulations on how to deal with exports. And there are export bans, especially for objects of a certain value, of a certain age. And these export bans are not only on the national level, but they are also on the international level. They are protected by the UNESCO Convention from 1970. And this example here is an example that relates to illegal excavations. Those are 2 vessels of 18 vessels dating back to the time between 2000 and 3000 before Christ. They were bought by Barakat Gallery in London, a famous gallery based in London. And this gallery, before it could sell these items, was sued by the Republic of Iran. And the Republic of Iran could prove that these items could be traced back to illegal excavations and had been exported illegally out of Iran. The claims were successful, and the case Iran versus Barakat Galleries is a famous court decision on a source nation recovering illegally excavated items from the international art trade. And again, we can see how important provenance is. Had Barakat Gallery known where the items came from, the violation of cultural heritage regulations would certainly not have happened. In conclusion, buying and selling without knowing the provenance of objects is a minefield. And if blockchain technology could bring transparency into this minefield, this would be a huge gain. Let me stress, though, that the mindset of the blockchain scene and the art market are very different mindsets. So in the blockchain scene, you have young, open source driven enthusiasts who, almost religiously believe in transparency. The art market is quite a different world. There's hardly any market who's as concerned about confidentiality as the art market. And that's why I think that implementing, hi Judy, welcome. We are very glad. So implementing this change, I think must happen in a very careful and very thoughtful manner. It must ensure that both the transparency interests and the confidentiality interests are brought into the right balance. And, if someone just goes there and says everything must go transparent, this has to be kind of a Wikipedia where you could read anything about who owns which artwork, that will clearly not work, and the art market would back up because that's just not the way the art market works. And there is a clear interest, and it's very understandable that a large, wealthy collection would not want their name tagged on any item that is moving around, and that there would be databases where you exactly see which item is part of what collection. And also, think of sales. If someone is selling something and doesn't, because he needs liquidity, he doesn't necessarily want to know others that he must sell the very highlights of his collection. So the art market will always have a desire for a certain degree and a strong degree of confidentiality. And if the mission, if that is managed, that if businesses now arise and work out the right balance between confidentiality and between transparency with blockchain technology, I think that could be a huge gain for the art market. And from what I understand about blockchain technology, there are ways to unite these two interests. There are open blockchains, there are closed blockchains. So either they have all information that's readable, or the information is only readable to those with the need to know. And I think this is now the moment to hear more on how all this really works and what blockchain technology is really like. And with this, I would like to give the word to my partner, Judy Reiniersen, whom we all welcome.
I'm going to jump in for a second while Judy takes a breath. I wanted to ask if you could, in a sentence, without taking us down too far of a tangent, if you could just describe, I think it'll be important going forward, the way that the law treats a good faith purchaser, because that will play in to some degree in kind of the value of the blockchain concept as applied to the art market. So maybe just a sentence on that, so we have that background going into the blockchain discussion.
Well, yeah, it depends on which jurisdiction we speak about. There are very different solutions. Speaking for Germany, for example, there is a strong protection for good faith purchases, but not for stolen objects. So you cannot acquire in good faith stolen objects. And I think in the US, this concept does not exist, right? Is there?
Yeah,
that's right. So there are many, and actually, interestingly, they coincide with strong art markets. Switzerland, for example, in Europe is the jurisdiction that does not protect stolen items and is a very strong art market. And in the US, so there are there are different solutions, but it does play an important role. I agree.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, and now Judy, if you're ready.
I'm ready. And first of all, I'm Judy Reiniersen. I'm one of the co-chairs of our global fintech group, and I have the pleasure of being one of the leaders of our own blockchain initiative, and I've been involved in the area of blockchain and cryptocurrencies for a while. Now, I'm looking at this today's presentation from the blockchain perspective as opposed to the art perspective. And I'm just giving some background about the blockchain and why it's so important and why we think it's really going to change how we work, how we move, how we trade. So what is the blockchain? I'm going to do this quickly because I assume a lot of you already know. It is what's often referred to as a distributed or shared ledger, and it's a platform that holds data and authenticates data securely, and this is important, transparently and immutably. Once it's on the blockchain, it is very hard to change. What blockchain is not, and I hear this all the time. It's like, oh, the blockchain is all the dark web. It's all the criminals using it. You have to think about the blockchain. I look at it as rails that apps work on. And something like Bitcoin, it's an application that works on this distributed ledger technology. But there's so many things you can do with the distributed ledger technology. Now, I have shamelessly borrowed a slide from, you can see in the left-hand corner, Price Waterhouse Coopers, PwC. And this gives you a little picture. I didn't want to get too deep in the weeds about how the blockchain works. There's, first of all, when you do a transaction, someone inputs a transaction, and then there are nodes, which is basically computers either within your own private blockchain or across the world that looks at this transaction, authenticates it. Once it's authenticated, it creates an extra block that goes onto the chain. That's why I call it blockchain. And once it's on the blockchain, you can update it with a new block on the blockchain that shows what changes have been made, but you can't go back and change a block that's already on the blockchain. How many blockchains are there? You could have hundreds or thousands of them. Our own firm is already setting up our own blockchain, but you can, the famous blockchain is, of course, the one that Bitcoin runs on. And purists will like to say, well, the blockchain is only the blockchain that Bitcoin runs on, and all the other chains or distributed ledgers should have their own names. But at this point, everyone's gone, forget about that. We're just going to call them all blockchains because it really is a great description of what this technology does. So just a reminder, as I said before, cryptocurrencies, which is the application we hear most about, it's simply an application that works on the blockchain. It is not the only thing you can do with the blockchain, and that's why the blockchain is important. I have 2 quotes here. I'm going to fill those out. That really hit me. I've been sort of dabbling with this. I started in this world on the cryptocurrency side. I was one of the lawyers who testified before Ben Losky, superintendent of banking's hearings about how should cryptocurrencies be regulated. And so I came to it from the cryptocurrency side, and it took a while for that light to go off of like, oh my gosh, this is really big. I mean, a lot of people, as Ginny Rometty from the IBM said, today the technology behind Bitcoin seems like a trinket for computer geeks, but when it's adopted, it will transform the world. A lot of people compare it to the internet. And another good quote from Richard Brown, who's the CTO at R3, who's one of the big blockchain crypto platforms, is that this is breakthrough in computer science. It doesn't happen very often, and it really provides, he mentions, a massive opportunity in finance, and I'm in the fintech world, but it's touching everything. So again, what we like to say is that the internet is to data what blockchain is to value. And when you think about it, those of us remember life before internet, the beauty of the internet was suddenly you could move newspaper articles, research, data from person to person without having to go to a central library or any other central person. And what blockchain does is, because it's immutable and transparent, it is capable of moving value. And that's why Bitcoin is one of the first apps, but other values and other very important documents such as deeds and stock shares. So there's a lot of uses for it. One of the things that people say is that the blockchain is going to be the end of law firms, and that's because lawyers act as a trusted intermediary, if you think about it, in a lot of these transactions. I had the opportunity to go to an MIT forum about the blockchain and lawyers, and it was really, heartwarming to hear these really young, geeky software guys saying, and engineers saying, we are going to need lawyers as well. It's like, yay! So the lawyers are they said that they realized that lawyers have the technical skills to place the rules in order. They said that the things like the famous DAO, where someone was able to just use their flawed rules to steal thousands and thousands of tokens, that they didn't have a good lawyer involved. And so I'd like to think that, yes, you are going to need lawyers in the future, even with blockchain, but I think we're all going to be doing different things. It's going to be a little bit different. So when it comes to blockchain and fine art, I've done a little bit of research on this. First of all, and I'm going to go ahead and put the 2 things up. First of all, there's already lots of folks looking at using the blockchain for investment purposes, and that's because of the ability to issue tokens. And my colleague, Tony Nolan, here is going to talk a little bit about that. Because the blockchain has these has one of the applications is issuing smart contracts, and a smart contract can be nothing more than a very simple token that has a utility purpose. It's how people have, you've heard about initial coin offerings. It's how people have raised hundreds of millions of dollars very quickly. The SEC isn't thrilled about it, but that is one aspect of the blockchain that the art community has already figured out. Here's one of the well-known art investment websites, and they are talking about raising funds and about using their platform and blockchain as a way to invest without intermediaries. The area that I'm most familiar with is the art provenance side, and that's because supply chain management's become one of the hot areas for the blockchain, and not just not just art. We're working with a vendor now, Chainvine, who is working with the French wine community. There's another area with highly valuable commodities that need to be tracked every step of the way. They're doing it for pharmaceuticals. Anytime you have something that you really want to make sure it's what it says it is, the supply chain management tools that are provided by the blockchain can be very helpful. And here are, again, some of the things that are already happening. It's like, it's already here. It doesn't take a lot of research to find it. There's a blockchain-based title registry, the Codex protocol. I've read a lot about it. It's very cool, and also provides a mechanism for people to register their art. And then there is Verisart, and they are, and this is their own quote, they say, the world's leading platform. I have not been out and been able to assure you that is true, but they are one of the bigger names in certifying and verifying art. And again, they use the blockchain in order to do that. Oh, and then Deloitte made an announcement. This is still just a use case, but they've come up with an app for distributor ledger tracking for provenance of fine art, too. So it is happening. This is not something in the faraway future. It is happening right now. So here's some thoughts about as you are looking at the world of fine art and preparing for the future. Learn, there's a lot out there. Learn about the applications, learn about use cases. There are many other use cases other than cryptocurrency. And then as you think about the use cases, if you're thinking about designing your own, and you can do this, think about each step and each task, because it really is one of those things that you have to think through very clearly. You have to decide what you want to be public versus private, and work on what we call rule-based protocols. The rules, again, your lawyers can help you write these to help you design what your application on the blockchain will be for the future. And one of the interesting things that I'm hearing more and more about, I have one of our major clients in the financial services world has already asked us if we can work with their general counsel's office on coding classes for lawyers. I have to admit that I was thinking, oh, well, won't we just hire coders to work with us? But, I do think we'll be better lawyers if we can do a little bit of coding ourselves and help understand what the engineering is that underlies it. So it is something that we're looking at as well. And I've been encouraging my kids to learn coding. They all roll their eyes. And I'm just going to close with a little bit about our own blockchain initiative. We're doing this in 3 stages. We're just, in fact, I just did the testing of our first stage. What we're trying to do is get our own lawyers up to speed on what the blockchain is, and it's really hard to talk about it. In a room like this with slides, we felt like you needed some hands-on experience with it. So we've retained a vendor, and first they're going to set up, we call it the sandbox, for all of our lawyers to just work with moving data around, moving contracts around between each other. Then we're going to create these use cases just for our contract work, because that's where we're starting. And then the third step is our own private permission blockchain, where we'll be able to add our use cases and then work with our clients on what would they like to see us do on the blockchain. And it's, again, for us, this is, I should tell you, really early stages. We're just taking, baby steps in getting into this, but we think it's really important, and time is passing. We really have to get on top of this. So I think that's it for me.
Judy, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Are you aware of any administrative limitations with respect to the blockchain? So, in other words, and not to conflate the two, but with cryptocurrency, you'll hear people say there's an energy limitation, there's a cost limitation. At some point, we'll run into issues that will have to be addressed in terms of the longevity and the lifeline of crypto. Is there anything like that with blockchain? Or?
It depends on the blockchain. I think the use cases that I'm seeing more often, people are setting up their own private permission blockchain. The big blockchain, where every time you have miners out there mining the cryptocurrency, it's taking an extraordinary amount of energy and time just now to mine one Bitcoin at this point. They set it up that way intentionally to cap the number of Bitcoin and to make it harder and harder as it gets closer to that cap. But the underlying rails you can really use without any necessarily administrative limit, just within your own group. we had the head of the London Stock Exchange, who is the head of the technology, for the London Stock Exchange, coming and meeting with us and talking about how it sped up so many, tracking transactions and booking, transfer of shares. And they were doing it all with an internal blockchain and with a limited number of, you don't need 1,000 people validating it. So they were doing it with a limited number, and they were very pleased with the result.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is, there are limitations, like with Bitcoin, there are limitations on energy. And there are blockchains that are trying to circumvent that by changing the manner in which blocks are created. So Bitcoin uses proof of work, where you can create a block by doing the work to create one. There's a growing movement towards proof of stake, which is basically the consensus of the blockchain, the consensus where you need to have 51% of the nodes agree before you can make a change, which effectively should make it very difficult to make changes to the data. They're moving to proof of stake, which basically gives the consensus rights based upon the ownership of the tokens, and that creates concerns about potential manipulation, other things. The other limitation is, as Judy mentioned, between the open source or the open blockchain and the permission blockchain. In regulated markets, a totally open blockchain like Bitcoin won't be appropriate for securities trading, loan trading, things of that sort. Use of blockchain for title registries. So there's another constraint, which is that for many uses of blockchain in certain industries, you need to have a permission system which will create its own limitations. And the last thing I would say is that and this might not be a big issue for the art market, but blockchain transactions are relatively slow. I think the fastest processing for blockchain transactions is something along the lines of 40,000 transactions per second, where Visa and MasterCard can do multiples of that. Mm-hmm. And the typical Bitcoin blockchain can create 7 blocks in 1 minute, which is a very, very slow pace. So there are those kinds of limitations.
Yeah. And there you're talking about the blockchain, not the many other little blockchains, the specific blockchain that Bitcoin works on.
Thanks, guys. And Tony, I think whenever you're...
So Judy told us about the great potential of blockchain and how blockchain can solve the problems that Frederica told us about. And I'm going to be a complete dose of cold water, because I'm going to be talking about some of the regulatory issues in relation to the use of blockchain. My focus will be on U.S. regulation, but many of the issues I'm describing have analogs elsewhere. Judy made an important point early on, that the blockchain has to be considered separately from ICOs and tokens. But the reality is that the growth of blockchain has been inextricably tied to issuance of tokens. And I'll talk about how some of those tokens have created speculative issues in a second. There are currently there's sort of 2 main categories of tokens. You think of the ones that are really used as currencies, say Bitcoin, both Bitcoin types, Ethereum, Litecoin, which are really payment systems. And there's a relatively small number of those. There are probably 15 of those currencies altogether. But there are many, many currencies that have been created in connection with particular platforms. And most platforms use an ERC-20 protocol that resides on the Ethereum blockchain, so that you need Ethereum to create a platform that can issue its own token. And there are something along the lines of 400 tokens worldwide. So generally, when you're thinking about a platform like Verisart, some of the ones that were identified, they will all be associated with a proprietary token. And the way that the tokens work is very different and creates a lot of issues. But this ability to create tokens, I mean, you can very easily on the Ethereum website or the Ethereum protocol, it's very easy to set up your own platform. I've never done it, so I only know this vicariously. Set up your own platform using Ether as a currency to issue your token. Once you've done that, if people have Ether or have Bitcoin, they can use that to give to you to pay for your token. And using a smart contract, this transaction takes place on the internet automatically, pseudonymously. And you're transferring value, your main cryptocurrency, you're receiving back a token. And it all takes place literally with the click of a mouse. And so the ease of creating tokens has led in part to this explosion in the number of tokens and the way in which they've taken markets by surprise. So I'm going to talk about a variety of issues: tokenization of art generally, some securities and compliance issues, and then a variety of other issues, including money transmitter issues. But I first wanted to just give you a sense of how crazy this market is. Floyd Mayweather, the boxer, has been very, very active, as have other celebrities. It's manic. In fact, it's to the point that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission recently issued guidance saying that cryptocurrency endorsements by celebrities can involve securities fraud. This slide shows you sort of how the volume of fundraising has grown between 2016 and 2017, just in initial coin offerings, which are basically offerings of tokens by one of these platforms I described that raise funds, typically Bitcoin or Ether, in the market. So these are U.S. dollar equivalents of amounts that were received, typically paid in cryptocurrency. In 2016, the top 10 ICOs netted $219 million. And the top ICO in that year was the Dow, which, as Judy alluded to earlier, was very troubled. And the sponsors had to give back all of the consideration that had been paid. If you eliminate the Dow, the top 10 ICOs in 2016 raised about $96 million. So then compare this to 2017. If you include the Dow, the number 2 ICO in 2017 raised more funds than all the top 10 in 2016. And if you take away the Dow, the Kinkirk, the number 6 ICO, raised about the same amount of money as all of 2016. So this has had an explosive growth, 590% growth in volume of funds raised. And in fact, in 2017, the ICO market raised more funds than the venture capital industry. And it was very common, and one of the reasons why there were so many tokens being issued, a startup company that in the ordinary, regular world would be a candidate for a Series A financing round, was getting valuations through the ICO market, getting pre-IPO valuations. And they didn't even have to issue equity because the tokens are not equity. They are just they're just tokens. They don't have a dilutive effect. And so what made the market so hot? So one issue was that this was simply a new technology, a hot technology. People were seeing the benefits of blockchain technology. People wanted to take advantage of it for its intrinsic benefits. There were platforms that had interesting stories to tell, interesting investment prospects. So that was part of it. There was just a desire to invest in the new thing. Another part of it is simply that there were a lot of fraudsters who saw an opportunity to create fraud, to create Ponzi schemes, and to issue tokens. And as I said earlier, you can literally just issue a token very, very quickly, and it can be sold just by clicking on the internet. It was very easy to get investors to invest in an idea, even if there was nothing there. And in fact, the U.S. regulators have been very focused on Ponzi schemes and many things. I mean, there would be schemes where somebody would create a smart contract that would take your money and issue a token, and there was actually nothing there at all. There wasn't even, like, they weren't using the blockchain other than by doing something on the Ethereum platform. So fraud, whenever you have something new and something that can be easily distributed, fraudsters will always come in, and that's part of it. But the main reason that it really blew up so quickly was the phenomenal and unprecedented ease of distribution. You had the blockchain was able to, the blockchain technology enabled the movement of money in a way that has never been seen before. You could literally invest simply by clicking your mouse. Once you invested, the money or the tokens, the cryptocurrency had moved. Once it had moved, it was immutably the property of the person who got it. It was also and this lent itself to a very rapid focus on the secondary market. You could issue your token to somebody. You didn't know who your investor was. You could issue to an investor. Your investor could sell very readily, very easily to other IP addresses, not knowing who was behind the IP address. And the platforms really very quickly were set up to accommodate the fact that investors were going to want to trade these very quickly. And this is a fundamental difference between crowdfunding and blockchain, ICOs. The fundamental difference is that where crowdfunding is taking money from a relatively discrete group of people, and there's not you're investing in a company or you're prepaying for a product, there isn't an easily tradable asset that comes out of that. In blockchain, you have a technology that enables a secondary market. And most ICO platforms have really been focused on the secondary market. So you'll have, like, a lot of ICO offerings will be issued at discounts with with staged discounts. If you buy early, you get a bigger discount. If you buy later, you get a less discount. Clearly designed to encourage people to buy early with the view that they'll be able to make money when they resell. The focus on the secondary market is sort of what makes this different from crowdfunding. And the easy ability to trade and create a secondary market and not necessarily know who you're selling to or buying from also creates another dynamic, which is that this is testing regulations that were written in a different age. And in this area, I would say 3 years ago was a different age. And there was going to one of the points Judy made, there was been a debate with blockchain generally and smart contracts. Do we need lawyers anymore? Shakespeare said, let's kill all the lawyers. And Vitaly Buterin, when he created Ethereum, said, let's not kill them, let's just make them irrelevant. I don't think that they will be irrelevant, but there was a real sense that they were. So, for example, the DAO took the view that they didn't need to have written contracts or legal contracts because the code was the contract. The code is our law. That didn't work very well for the DAO because some investor was able to reverse engineer the open source code and figure out a way to steal all the proceeds of the offering. And the DAO fixed that problem. And the DAO fixed that problem by doing a hard fork, which basically brought the blockchain state to an earlier point in time so that the defalcation was undone. But that was a cardinal sin for the blockchain purist because it threatened the whole notion of immutability. So this is why the DAO really blew apart, and they had to give back all of their money. But the notion that we don't need contracts, the law is just our code, that's sort of a philosophical precept that one saw and still sees people in the ICO world espousing. I think what you will see is that lawyers in the law will need to understand coding, and coding and law will have to work together much more than they do now. But there was a sense that with ICOs are unregulated. We are in a post-regulatory world. There is no regulation that covers this. And what we're discovering, and I'll talk about this in a bit, is that the regulators are saying, well, no, actually there is a lot of law. In the securities world, there is 80 years worth of law. We simply have to apply the existing law to new circumstances. And so the regulators are catching up in the U.S. and in other jurisdictions. And I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about three major categories: securities and commodities law issues, tax issues, and AML, money transmitting issues. So when the ICO market, starting with securities law, when the ICO market first began, the holy grail for all the tokens was to be a utility token. And the notion was, and then there was case law in the U.S. and SEC guidance, that if you have an instrument that people can invest in, but it's really something that doesn't look and feel like a security, but it looks and feels more like a Starbucks gift card, or a Book of the Month club, or a country club membership, something of that sort, then it's not a security. It's really something that is being purchased for its intrinsic utility. And while it might have a value, and the value might increase, and you might actually hope that the value will increase, the main point of the instrument is not to be a speculative instrument, not to be a security, but to be something you can use. And this test is called the Howey test, based upon the Supreme Court case that first articulated it. And when after the DAO blew up, the SEC validated the application of this test in ICOs and tokens by doing a report that dissected the DAO and concluded that the DAO securities really were, the tokens really were securities. And so this has created the notion that a token can be a utility token, not a security. Utility has two problems in the context of ICOs. One problem is that many of the ICO platforms that were issuing tokens didn't actually have a product or something that you could use at the moment. They simply had a business with an idea for a product that they wanted to develop. So the utility didn't exist when the token was being offered. But secondly, even where utility existed, investors were encouraged to speculate. And the SEC subsequently said that utility is really not enough if the plan of distribution of the token is really designed to create a secondary market. And so the utility token now really has been limited in scope to where a token can be created and used just on the platform. And there's really no incentive for investors to speculate or to try to trade in the secondary markets. A good example of this would be, let's say, a loyalty program. Let's say if a hotel chain were using blockchain for a loyalty program, and you could get tokens or mine tokens by staying in the hotel. You could use tokens to get hotel rooms for free, but you couldn't trade them. That would be a good example. An online blackjack table would be another example. But for the most part, most of the ICOs that are issued to fund, the kinds of platforms like all the platforms that are on this screen, are presumptively securities. And they're subject to securities law liability, but they're also subject to registration requirements. And this creates an issue in that in order to comply with securities law, you have to know that your investor meets certain requirements. In certain cases, you have to be able to comply with resale restrictions. That's very difficult to do in this sell pseudonymously on the click of a button kind of issue. And so we're seeing a real evolution, very quick evolution in the market as the infrastructure is growing up for securities tokens. Just on two other things, I would say that on tax, so one of the issues with tokens is that the tax authorities take the view that a token transaction is a taxable event. So that if you're buying something using a token, it's not like buying with cash and you simply buy it. You actually have a taxable event because you have sold your token and you have a gain or a loss depending upon what you bought it for. In addition, the IRS, the U.S. tax regulator, is investigating the use of ICOs and investments in tokens as a tax evasion device. So there's a lot of focus on tax. If you have a platform, the Federal Reserve Bank has taken the view that you are presumptively in a money transmitting business, and so you have to deal with money transmitting licenses. And then lastly, you have just general anti-money laundering issues because of this ability to trade securities or trade value pseudonymously. There's a famous book called Money Laundering Through Art, and the rise of blockchain may be the second version of this. As I mentioned, globally there have been a lot of developments. Some jurisdictions are more friendly, Switzerland, Gibraltar, Cayman Islands. Some are very unfriendly, like the Republic of Korea, the People's Republic of China. But there's generally been a sort of a consistent effort by regulators around the world to come up with this, to come to grips with this. And so this is the background and the regulatory background in which a lot of the tokenization that will be applicable in the art market will grow up.
Thanks so much, Tony. I, kind of with that backdrop, and before we open it up to questions, I think it would be helpful to have some sense of how kind of practically this would be implemented in the art market. So, what would it look like? And physically, what would it look like? Is there some sort of a barcode, for example, on the works? And are we talking about physical works? What if we have, video? So what is kind of the practical implication of applying blockchain and crypto principles to the art market? And that's sort of for all of you. I think that implicates all of your talks. So,
well, from a provenance perspective, yes, it usually does require some, in order to track a piece of art from Europe to the U.S., for example, it usually does involve some kind of tag or code that is automatically read at every step of the way so that you know where it's going to be and automatically locked into the blockchain to show, yes, it was received in Geneva at this moment. And then if the piece doesn't arrive at the next place, it will be automatic, and you won't be able to go back and change the paperwork to show that it's gone to a different location. It's a very effective way to track lots of things around the world, but you do need some kind of token or barcode or chip to do that.
Yeah, I would actually just build on that by just thinking about three kinds of use cases. You say provenance. So I think the three use cases that I've been focused on have been provenance and authentication, rights management, which maybe is more of an issue for performing arts than fine art, and investments in art. So looking at provenance authentication issues, I think that there is a very strong potential for blockchain to create the immutable records of title, ownership, and everything. And that's like a complete utility. And I think that a provenance website that is really just there to create a database that is secure and controlled would be a great example of utility token. I think if you're looking at, say, an art fund, like the Maecenas Fund that we were looking at earlier, I think that there, anybody who's going to be investing in that is going to be presumptively investing in a security. And then you have an interesting issue with rights management. And there's been a lot of focus on using blockchain to allow artists to get royalties and micropayments without going through a rights management agency. And recently, I guess in the visual arts area, the most high profile of these is Kodak Coin, where Kodak has partnered up in a joint venture to create a cryptocurrency that will allow photographers and owners of photography collections to monetize their rights. You have a very interesting dilemma. And I was thinking of Kodak Coin in particular. So if you're using this as rights management, and you're going to use the tokens so that you can basically buy the tokens and then use the tokens to pay the artist. If the tokens can only be used on the platform, then they probably would not be a security, they'd be a utility. But then you have an issue of how the artist would be able to monetize the token and make it into money. And you may have an issue where the only way that kind of platform works is if you can really have a secondary market. And so if you have a secondary market, you then are looking at the token being a security. In fact, Kodak Coin considered this issue, and they structured their token as a security. So the problem then with the rights management program, with its complying with securities laws, is that the only people who can get the token, say in the U.S., have to be accredited investors, at least for a lengthy period of time. And so if you're using this as rights management to get royalties for your photography, it's not very practical because you can the only people who can get the token are people who are very high net worth kind of individuals. And you can't really use this for just retail level licensing. And so I think that the use of blockchain and rights management is probably, to my mind, the use case that's going to create the most issues of how it can be practical and compliant.
Thanks. Did you
Yes.
want to weigh in? I think
Thanks.
there's a minute left.
Following up on what Judy said on the tagging of artworks. Obviously, so these are two technologies then, right? We have the blockchain technology, which is the ledger, and then the objects themselves must be linked because otherwise the information that would be stored would not be linked to the objects themselves. So the kind of transparency gain there or the information gain would not really be anchored with the objects themselves. And I know that there are several companies already working on this kind of token or labeling these systems. For example, working on artificial DNAs that could be applied to artworks, and then make them basically. You can scan a barcode and then you discover this is really the item. And if you link that to the blockchain and to the information that is stored on the objects in the blockchain, then it's also revolutionary and that's another use case for the catalog raisonné system. For example, to manage an artist's estate or to manage the oeuvre of an artist and to know which works really belong to the oeuvre of the artist and which don't, then the issue we've always had with catalog raisonnés is that they are, either a book or a database, and they say these are the works, but they have never been linked to the objects themselves.
Yeah.
And so this kind of certainty you gained from knowing my work, the work I own is in the catalog raisonné, it's listed there, here's the photo, always relied on the connection between the object and the information that was written there in the database or in the book. So so this link could help, and that would be a second use case. I think that would be very interesting. And then of course, if we have all this, worldwide real-time access to provenance information, to those objects, it's not just the catalog resume, it's so many other things, but it would speed up all transactions. It would speed up insuring art. It would speed up borrowing against art. Everyone would immediately find in the ledger the information related to the object, and the object would be anchored to that information. And you would exactly know this is the item, and this is all the information that we have on that item. And, all the research you usually do, for example, as an auction house to do an auction catalog, you would not necessarily need to do that anymore. So everything would also be quicker than in the transaction.
It's incredibly powerful. Yeah, I agree. Amazing.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks to my partners, Judy and Tony and Federica. Thanks to all of you. We had hoped to open up for questions, but I know we started a little bit late, so we're running behind. We'll take a 5-minute break, and we'll stay up here for any questions you may have, and then we'll transition to our next panel. Thank you, guys.
I wish to thank Desiree Moore and her incredible colleagues from K&L Gates Law Firm. This is our first collaboration, and it is a pleasure and an honor to meet all of you, incredible attorneys. I come from a family of attorneys, and I wish my family were as interesting as you are, but bravo. Thank you for this really, really interesting topic this morning that touches all of our lives. And now we hope to touch your hearts, maybe in a little bit of a different way. So without further ado, can you hear me if I speak from here? Is it okay? My name is Judy Holm. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of the Global Fine Art Awards, and this has been a true labor of love for 5 years of my life. Feels a bit longer, but it's definitely been a full 5. And we hope that you will enjoy learning a little bit more about our program and hearing from some of the most interesting people on the planet. I travel a lot. I have a lot of connections through this incredible program that we have been developing with the most remarkable people I've had the pleasure, honor to meet, encounter, and work with of my entire life. And I've been working for a very long time. So in all honesty, this is the most incredible group of people I've ever really been involved with. And as our circle grows, not to use the word ecosystem, Joe Lynn Hill, one of my least favorite words that's kind of overly used, I think, right now. We feel it's really an important mission that we have. And I also feel that that's why so many people are choosing and seemingly quite passionately as involved almost as I am. So thank you all on behalf of GFAA for being here this morning, for being part of our mission, and for the future of how art sits in society and as part of the global world that we live in, which I feel is often not particularly connected in ways that it has been historically from the beginning of time, as art has traveled across civilizations and has been perhaps more strongly, definitely more strongly than language, has been a way that has connected with different civilizations and helps, to me, maintain a sense of balance and appropriateness that we so often need to be reminded in the world today and all of all times, but particularly now, I would say more than ever, at least in our lifetimes. Okay, I'm going to ask our unbelievable panelists. I have a more informal style of moderating than some people. I have the great pleasure in the capacity as moderator of having had some interaction with all of our 4 panelists on, this is called Art and the Global Voice of Humanity, Artists Tell Their Stories. And I use the word artist in the broadest definition. I feel that we are all artists, and this is the part of our persons, our avatars, that we should all strive to develop in every way possible, because in artistry lies, to me, some of the most beautiful gifts of humanity. And I hope we all maybe come away from this panel thinking about the backgrounds and the accomplishments, the incredible accomplishments, and the personalities of each of our panelists. And so as we go through the panel, thinking about the different perspectives, I would invite, rather than me mistake or not perhaps say some of the elements that you presented in your unbelievable bios, to just a brief introduction, Mary Sabatino, my dear colleague.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, thank you. It's really a privilege to be here and also to see in the audience friends and colleagues who I collaborated with some of the artists, which was the reason I was invited to speak, to see Ana Martinez, whom I collaborated with at the Reina Sofia on an amazing Andy Goldsworthy project, and Jo Lynn Hill, who I work with on Ana Mendieta and Jaume Plensa. So it's just another sign, I think, that the world, we never know, like a nautilus shell, which way we're going to come around and who we'll meet. And therefore, I think we have to act with attention and kindness and integrity towards everyone. I've been an art dealer for many years and have had the privilege of, oops, is this off?
Malfunction, technical malfunction here. Use my
speak more. And have had the privilege to have been mentored by artists that whole way. And that's why I'm here.
Baiku?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Beichu Gonkar, and I'm the founder and CEO of Art Represent. Art Represent started really as a passion project, and it's a platform for artists who are affected by conflict from across the globe. So we work with artists, unfortunately, across all continents, because there are conflicts happening all the time, and it seems to be growing. It is an incredible honor to be here and to be sitting amongst this fantastic panel. And I have to say that I'm really here on behalf of, the artists that we work with and the incredible work that they do. As Judy said in the beginning, I think art has always had more power than language in terms of just getting people to see the human behind the words, the politics, the culture, the way that we dress, the way that we present ourselves, the color of our skin. And through the work that we do, that's something that becomes really, really obvious. People who may not have an empathetic attitude towards a certain conflict area, towards a certain community of people who might not be interested in politics at all, end up interacting, with personal stories of individuals who are affected by these global conflicts and violence through the work that they create, and then start having this very intimate relationship with that particular artist and their story. And through that, a dialogue comes out. It can be as simple as having a piece of artwork hanging in your living room, and you have a dinner party and people ask you about it, and you talk and you expand, and the story comes out. Or it could be walking past, a sculpture in your office, for example, or in the square in your local community. And I think that dialogue is what's so powerful about art, and the way that they connect people, and the way that they bring out the sort of more emotive side of who we are.
Thank you, dear. Thank you, dear. We'll get into the topics in a sec. But about you,
Hi, hello. Thank you so much. First of all, my name is Paolo Colombo, and all I can say is I've been on both sides of the fence. I started out as an artist and moved on to be a curator. In fact, I think we even worked on a show together, right, Mary?
Yeah,
yes,
with
yes,
Jack Lerner.
Exactly. Yeah, ages ago. And now I'm back to making art and curating. And I have actually been lately involved with the Istanbul Museum of Modern Art, and even more lately with the Ruya Foundation on a number of projects. And I think Tamara will tell us more about Ruya and the project.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us here. It's a pleasure, and it's very exciting. I haven't been back to New York in 7 years, so it feels like a lifetime ago. I'm very pleased. In fact, I just wanted to thank Judy in particular for the organization of the panels, because I feel like as far as the previous one, it feels not only like a different world, but a different galaxy of blockchains and art funds and the likes, particularly with the kind of work that we do, which is much more related to art and conflict and artists from those areas in specific. So I'm a writer and historian by background. I'm also a curator, and I founded with several other people Ruya Foundation, which is for the time being, an Iraq-based foundation that focuses on specifically art and creating that bridge, that connection between Iraq and the world and vice versa, because of what used to be a very rich artistic tradition in that country. And the flagship project of Ruya, we do many things, but the flagship project has been to represent the Iraq Pavilion at the Venice Biennale for the last 3 editions, 2013, 15, and 17. And I've had the chance to work with some wonderful curators in all those, but for the 2017, in fact, Paolo and myself curated the show, which is entitled Archaic, and for which we're finalists, nominees
for the Best Public Art Award,
which was a very challenging project, and we'll talk about it later, and a labor of love amongst other things. So yes, that's.
I want to particularly thank everyone who had to take a train, a plane to get here today. Many traveled far and wide. And it also is such a testament to the global aspect of what our program is about, and many of also the K&L Gates partners who come from other areas and place, even getting from outer parts of New York. In fact, our only cancellations are from people who live in New Jersey. So I don't know what that means, but it's the truth.
15 inches of snow and power out.
Okay. I would like to read you a quote, and I'm going to ask anyone to guess who said it and approximately when. Okay? Without my broken glasses. Art is higher than reality and has no direct relation to reality. To approach the spiritual in art, one will make as little use of possible of reality, because reality is opposed to the spiritual. We find ourselves in the presence of an abstract art. Art should be above reality, otherwise it would have no value for man. His art, however, remains rooted in nature. How's that for?
Kandinsky?
No? Good guess? Anyone else? Nope. This gentleman is actually one of our nominees. He's no longer living today, so that gives you a guess on the date. I'll give you another hint. He died in New York City, less than a mile from here, where there was a massive gathering at his burial at a chapel called the Universal Chapel, less than a mile from here.
Jack Whitney? No.
Okay, all you art historian PhD people fail. Oh, no. Piet Mondrian. Okay. Voila. So, but that sort of, and the year was 1914. So think about that statement or that paraphrase and how relevant, if I may humbly agree, that this is so much of what I personally feel, and I'm very interested to hear the perspectives of our esteemed panelists in the words, answering the questions that we're going to pose to them this morning. In terms of housekeeping, I for anyone who knows me, could talk all day until I'd have to go to the gala tonight, but we can't do that. So to keep it moving and to keep it fresh and lively, what I'd like to propose, kind of like speed dating, which is the following. We have 4 panelists, we have 5 questions, and and I would like each panelist to answer in 1, maximum 2 minutes, okay? And we're going to be clocking it, again, just because I think we all are passionate about what we do, so we could talk a lot. And you each have the right to skip 1 question. Or if it just doesn't feel good, just say next, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So, and I'll do order differently. I'm from a large family, so we had to do things like this to not feel like you were left out. All right. I'm sorry, pronounced correctly, Baishu. We all met in London, these 3 of us, and Mary and I have been colleagues she was an early adopter to GFA. We love her so much. She was the first gallerist to acknowledge our program. And anyway, so Baishu?
Yeah.
Baishu, okay. So in your own words, please describe how your work connects with other people and other cultures around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I already addressed that a little bit earlier on in my introduction. And before I begin my answer, can I just say Happy International Women's Day? It's great to be in New York on this day. So to the men and women in the room, of course. So, in terms of connecting with other people and other cultures, I did talk earlier about, art having that power to transcend language and geography. And I think, when we've had physical events and projects and shows of a particular artist from a particular region, it's been incredible to see the types of people who come through our door and the interactions that they have. So we'll have the diaspora community from that particular conflict area, but also the local Londoners, and then to see them interact and talk about, I don't know, how the food might be similar, or how the fashion might be different, or how things are unexpected, or how things are as expected. And I think that's kind of the beauty that I really see through the work that we do.
And congratulations, this young woman, a refugee from Tibet, London-based, came and started this on her own. Talk about a labor of love. And in addition to her day job, she helps people all over the world.
What is your day job?
I work with a tech startup, so I help them with so I'm in charge of business development. Yeah.
Paolo?
Hard question. I relate to individuals, never to groups. So it's
a beautiful answer.
One.
It's a beautiful answer. Yes? Tamara?
I need you to repeat the question.
Okay. In what ways does your work connect with other people and other cultures around the world?
Yeah, I second what Paulo says, because I think at the end of the day, it's about an individual. And as much as the world loves labels, and we're all here under specific labels, I find those to be more and more restrictive and frankly, oppressive. And I think what's very exciting about being able to do work where you're relating ultimately to, a person and their work and how that work may affect someone else is the fact that it is about breaking down those labels and those boundaries. And I like to look at it. I mean, I hate the terminology because I'm not a huge fan of sort of UN lingo, but I think it's a very effective way of cultural diplomacy at the end of the day, the way that by being able to bring different works of art where you look at that, I mean, the work before you look at where that person's from, where they grew up, what they did, is I think, extremely potent. It's a very powerful thing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. By the way, all four of our panelists, Mary is representing three of our 85 nominees of this year's edition are represented by Gallery Lalong. And there are other galleries there. This year, there are approximately 15 galleries that represent we're talking not secondary market, that represent about 20 of our nominees. And the caliber and level, because what our mission is to identify and recognize the best curated exhibitions and installations around the world. We love emerging artists, we love mid-career artists, but that's not our mission. Our mission is to demonstrate to the world, to the public, general public, what's the best and why, what matters the most, and to sort of break through the noise of all the other great stuff that's happening in the art world. So the testament to the level of artists whom Mary works with and represents as an unbelievable leader and steward of the careers of these incredibly historically important people, should definitely be recognized. And she'll be there with us tonight. And by Shu, what she's doing is it's absolutely groundbreaking, and the level of contribution and demonstration to humanity of how to help other people and using art to do it and showing the best of what human beings can do. It's remarkable. And last but definitely not least, I had the extreme pleasure. I wear your T-shirt to bed. It's called Archaic, and I saw the installation. I'm a huge fan. I lived in Venice. Venice Biennale is a big inspiration for the Global Fine Art Awards. I believe we have at least four nominees of our 85 are from the Venice Biennale from this last edition in different award categories, because Venice is Venice. And essentially some of our award nominees could be in different categories, but thank you. Well deserved, all of you, for your nominations. Okay, second question. We're going to rotate it. We're going to start with Tamara. Tamara is, please tell me I'm pronouncing it correctly. Tamara, okay. Okay, number 2. Oh, I mixed it around. Please describe your work and share how it relates to humanity. Is that too close to number 1? Okay. I wasn't sure if people felt it the same. All right. Describe how your current work, so here we're going to get some previews on what's coming up next with these brilliant people. Describe how your current work relates to themes or individual artists from the past.
Well, I don't know. I mean, current, there's as in what I...
As you wish.
Okay, I mean, I don't know, maybe it might be interesting just to talk about the show
Yes, yes.
So the show that we devised and curated in Venice, which was the Iraq Pavilion, was entitled Archaic. And we took that definition to linguistic definition, which has 2 meanings, and they're effectively, there's a tension, there's a contradiction in those 2 definitions. One being what is ancient, what is essential, what is sort of at the base of civilization, what is arguably the id versus the ego, what is the foundation of origin. And Iraq, as a country that's been or as a land, let's say, is often, related to the cradle of civilization, the Garden of Eden, all of these things that are very potent in the Bible and other ancient books. And equally, what's archaic is what is no longer in use, what is out of date, what is defunct, what is not relevant. And that seemed also a very apt way to describe Iraq in its current situation, both on many levels. And here I mean on the political level, on the societal level, bureaucratic, in terms of identity of self-definition, the breakdown that goes back to the tribe, religion, gender, all of these things. So meaning the codes, the overall packaging is archaic, arguably. And so the show was rooted in getting objects from the famous Iraq museum that was looted in 2003, and having those objects be limited to, be the foundation and the inspiration for the new works that we commissioned, works that we commissioned artists to do based on themes from the archaic, such as the earth, water, war, the hunt, sound, writing. Very basic, but they're essential.
Thank you, Tamara. And may I ask a follow-up question with Paolo? How many people had the opportunity and pleasure to visit this in Venice? Okay. I hope you all agree that they're well deserving of being a finalist of any award program, and proudly so of ours. Paolo, if you could answer a question, it might be a trick question. How many pieces? I think this is really interesting because I saw it and was so overwhelmed with the depth and breadth. And again, how it relates to GFAA, I can't help but think of it in those terms. But what the depth and breadth of this work was absolutely stunning, and the themes addressed absolutely stunning. And apropos everything that Tamara just mentioned, this is life, and this is how art does the best job to transcend the basics and the necessities and the importance of life. So, apropos, how many pieces, the oldest and the newest, and how did you manage to get some of the pieces out? Because I imagine that was very difficult. So maybe Paolo?
I think that was Tamara's doing.
Okay.
She actually selected everything. She selected every single piece.
Wow.
And she fought like a devil to have them come out. And we actually did not know whether we would have them until 2 days before the opening. It was a bit of a tightrope walking, but she's an incredible acrobat, and she made it.
The oldest? So people understand what archaic really means.
It was 8,000 years old, the oldest.
Tremendous.
We had selected the themes.
Yes.
In fact, she everything that was related and it still carries on today. So from the hunt to music to writing, because actually. It was the cradle of civilization, of culture,
yes.
of writing, of everything. So it was easy to select the themes and harder to select the pieces, but perfectly fine selecting the artists.
I encourage everyone to please, at some point, not right this second, because please stop looking at your phones, but on our globalfineartawards.org website, one of the things that's part of our program that we're very proud of is we produce videos for all of our award finalists. This is our 4th year with young Hogan Fritz, whoever's going to be there this evening at our award ceremony. He and I, mostly him, I give him vast majority of the credit. He's a brilliant guy. 124 videos we have as stewardship of the best artwork created in the last 4 years. And there are several that are, including the Iraq Pavilion, that is a video that encapsulates. We try to do our best to encapsulate with there are no words, there are no curators talking. It's a visual snapshot of what's happening the best in the world each year. So thank you. I'm seeing it right now and remembering it with such incredible awe. So it was really, really brilliant. Thank you for being here and for sharing that with a larger audience, because that's what we're trying to do. Baishu?
So I will definitely check it out online. I'm really sorry that I missed it. In terms of the question, I think I really agree with Tamara about labels, and I think especially when you are coming from a region affected by conflict and you're, forcibly displaced and you have this label of becoming a refugee, it's really hard to escape that and to show your individuality. And I think artists have always tried to show their individuality and, to show the complications of the intersections of gender, of politics, of sexuality, etc. I think it's done really well through art. And so for us, our next step is to set up a foundation this year to solely focus on physical projects where, you can kind of really bring that individuality to life and to let that artist identity, interact with the local community. So,
Baishu, if I may ask another question. Based in London, and you work with artists digitally around the world and help promote them in a very positive definition of the word promote. And in terms of having now a physical space, it's a nomadic, though, still style? There won't...
It's a very nomadic style. Yes. So we have the digital platform where we, obviously sell the artist works to bring about economic empowerment. But the foundation would be focused on working with partners across the globe to create these nomadic projects. Fantastic. So, for example, we've got one that's really exciting coming up in the DRC with a partner on the ground. So we'll be creating an artist incubation program. So really training the artists in how to create a career in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Wow. Brava. Yeah. Emphasis on the A on the end. Sorry, can't help it. Mary.
I'm actually still thinking about the first question.
Then go back to it. Speed dating doesn't have any strict rules, so whatever.
Which I didn't really answer. I guess I've always been focused on community. And even in my day job as an art dealer, you exhibit artists' work, you try to find homes for them, but in the larger sense of that, you are creating, I sometimes call it a team, but a community for each of your artists, whereby their work is transmitted to the world, or you try to make a kind of fertile ground for seeds to grow. And that's always been really important, because all the artists who I work with and all the artists whom I've ever known really want their message to be heard in whatever way the message is best transmitted. Very few artists really want to be just in their studio, or they want to be in their studio, but they want to know that what they're doing is important for someone other than themselves. I think recognition is really important for every human being. So for me, I mean, in my, let's say, life outside an art dealer, I've always been involved in different kinds of communities. I'm probably the only art dealer who physically ever built a school in Nicaragua. So this, for me, my interest in the world, in politics, in refugees, is very mirrored by my work with artists who address these issues. And I've always felt quite humbled by how people like you work in the world and then communicate these more fragile humanities for us. And I think they are fragile humanities and need to be protected. So sometimes an art gallery isn't the best venue for that, but that's the one I have, and that's the one that I use.
I go to Mary's gallery as often as I'm invited, and sometimes when I'm even not. And she's very gracious in welcoming me and everyone. Go to Mary's gallery, Gallery Lelong in Chelsea. One of the most recent panels that she held was remarkable. It was kind of a pop-up, right? And the messages there, so they're on our radar for next year, Mary, because again, the work of what's happening in the world today, in society, it's something that art has a very significant voice. It doesn't have to, the word voice is very important, and it's one of the themes that we look at all the time, and it doesn't have to be a loud voice, but it's a collective voice and a consortium, maybe perhaps is a better word, a consortium of voices that speak the same language without words necessarily, which I think that these four incredible individuals are demonstrating quite beautifully. So next question, please. And then we'll have two more questions. So I think we're okay on time, I feel? Okay. Who or what has been the biggest influence on your work? Baishu, I'll start with you, please.
I really like learning across different disciplines, and I feel like, mixing cross-disciplinary, cross-sector inspirations can be really great. And for me, I look to writers like Zadie Smith or Chimamanda Adichie. I look at, showrunners like Shonda Rhimes and, companies like Netflix, who are creating original productions. And I think what they all have in common is showing, a sense of individual identity, being able to convey complex ideas, complex systems of being, structures of repression that create certain paths for certain groups of people through their work, and to be able to communicate that on a wider level so that everybody feels engaged. And I think for me, that's always been a huge inspiration.
Wonderful. Mary, I'm going to go this way now. Turn it around.
I'm still an art dealer because of Alfredo Jar. Because I was on my way to interview, or I had just come back from an interview at NYU Law School, and I went to the Spring Street subway station, and I saw Alfredo's Rush series, where he was. There were big posters. This was a time when the price of gold was rising, and causing economic devastation. And so they were images of miners from Serra Pelada, Brazil, and the price of gold. And when I saw those posters, I thought, maybe I should stay.
Oh, thank you.
And that was 87.
Thank you, Mary. Tamara?
I'm going to pass on that question.
Okay. Paolo?
My drawing teacher in 7th grade.
Oh, I love that.
And I tell just give you the context. I was in boarding school in top of a mountain in Switzerland, and
sounds nice.
Yeah, no, so it's okay. I mean, it was and he just told us to go and buy some gouache and bring them to class and a block of paper, watercolor paper, and he took out Tonio Kröger, the book, in the moment when Hans Hansen and Inge Holm are seen by Tonio Kröger on the beach kissing. And he just read these 5 lines and said, illustrate it. Oh. And that's when I understood that was an incredible opening in the world. I actually studied literature, I did not study art. And I've always oscillated between the two. And I have also always related to art one-to-one, as one would read a book. And I think it really started there. And it just made me look forward to the 2 weekly hours of drawing.
On top of the mountain.
On top of a mountain, yeah.
That's a beautiful image. Wow. It's hard. I understand. Thank you. And the next question is maybe also a little bit selfish, because I'm really wanting to know what we might be lining up for next year's nominees, and also really what's happening around the world. And I know you all look at things in a very comprehensive way and are very integrated to a lot of different things that are happening around the world, both personally, career-wise, and also, I believe, in your ways of being human, which is what this panel is about. And you were all my first picks, and I thank you for saying yes for being on this panel again. So this time we'll start with Tamara. You can't have another pass.
Yes, but I don't know what the question is.
So the question is your future project. I'm sorry, I thought you were looking at the paper.
Oh, no,
what are you excited about for future projects, yours and others? What's on your radar screen in simple terms?
Yes, again, it's about that label thing. I think that there is I think what the first panel. Sorry, this is my. If I skip, can I have more than 2 minutes? The first panel, I think, was really interesting. Thank you very much. Sorry, I can just see Frederica there, but and Tony. That's it. But to me, I mean, I had all these questions to ask you about, stolen artifacts and artworks and how that all works and potentially could work in all these different countries. But what it did demonstrate to me is how divided the art world is. I mean, we're talking about, the humanities. So we're talking really about a very, and it's fine, it's just that I wanted to highlight that, a very Western-centric reality. I get it. We're in New York City. But that's actually how, that's where so much of the influence in terms of whether it's cultural, even if the money comes from elsewhere, it's still there where it's sort of, there's a validation in terms of an intellectual, cultural one, financial, in every single possible way. And I think one of the challenges and we're doing, in fact, collectively, and is looking beyond just a specific country, but actually trying to plug in all these voices of so many different artists who are saying very similar things. It's not the fact that you are trying to show an artist from a place of conflict, that all they want to talk about is, bombs and misery. They also have lives. They fall in love. They sing. They have children. It's people are the same at the end of the day. And I think so. Looking at like the next project that we're launching and what we want to be doing is precisely trying to somehow tighten this space to make it much more unified. And given what Mary was saying, one of the biggest challenges that we face with the artists that we work with, and I've been working with now for some of them since this foundation started 5 years ago, is actually finding them places to be able to be seen. Which is their plight, but mine as well. Because if you don't fit into and curatorially, they may be, emerging artists that could be on a wonderful level with somebody similar in places where they are connected, and not being able to give them that space. So I want to create one. That's my next project.
Thank you.
You can tell them.
No, you tell.
So the next, yes, we're sort of in this incubation, well, not incubation, we're sort of coming out. But so we wanted to keep, as the founders of Ruya Foundation, the name Ruya, which, by the way, I just wanted to say means in several languages, means insight, vision, dream, And it's the same, it's sort of slightly pronounced differently in both Arabic, Persian, Turkish, Kurdish, Urdu. So it has, different places, but it's and so we're looking to keep that just because of the recognition factor that we've worked very hard to develop. But the new thing will be called Ruya Maps, and maps being both a noun and a verb, and the fact that it's sort of mapping out these different connections that are not uniquely based on, of course they're influenced by geography, but they're not based on where people necessarily come from, but what they're saying thematically. And what places from conflicts, bringing people who come from very different backgrounds together, but whose work may be similar, who may be saying the same thing. Yes.
Tamar, that's beautiful. And actually, the phrase that stands out, which then you reiterated, is "after all, we're all the same." And I think what you just said in the second part of your answer, clearly it's going to be incredible, and it makes so much sense to me. Absolutely. If I may interject, excuse me. One of our other nominees is something called, it's different, but the same idea of network connecting forensic architecture. Is anyone familiar with this project? There was an exhibition at MACBA in Barcelona, and it's actually doing real good of mapping out what happens after buildings have been bombed, et cetera, and recreating what was. That's one of the primary uses of how they do use forensics, and they're scientists and computer scientists, and they map out all over what's happening and how it's all interconnected when there's no physical thing left, and one needs to know what was there for many reasons on many levels of humanity. So sounds like what you're doing in a different way has some similarities.
Yes, hopefully we can do it if we're able to raise the funds to do it. That's a minor point.
Paolo, do you have anything to say on this topic?
Yes. Besides this collaboration, I actually live in Greece. And we're
mountains, Greece.
Yes,
what a life.
But we're actually trying to sort of make an antenna for this Ruya project called Creativity for Survival in the island of Lesbos, which is one of the main places of influence.
We'll come and visit.
Please, and also I'm actually trying to make a drawing center in the island of Syros.
Syros.
Yes. So it's active in
fantastic
in the arts locally.
We look forward to being on the mailing list for these, because it sounds like a good place to come and come.
Okay. All of you.
Thank you. And Baishu?
I think I'm really excited to just start seeing more representation of the artists that I work with, and I'm sure the artists that Tamara and Paolo work with as well on a more international stage. And I think this panel and this award, is definitely one of them. And I hope to see more of these representations come through. We're called Art Represent, and it's very simple. It's just representation of individuals through their art. And something I'm really excited about is that apart from the foundation, the sort of commercial side of what we do, we're now trying to connect more with corporations and brands. So to, get these people to start working with artists who, are from, areas, communities affected by conflict, and to communicate this idea, that Tamara was talking about, that we're all the same, so we stopped seeing images of people from Syria, Afghanistan, just in the news, who are in camps and who, they're just dehumanized. But to start seeing them, on posters and on billboards, and to see their ideas be inserted onto the packagings of products that we use every day, and that's something that I really look forward to exploring more.
Wow, that is tremendous. And I could not agree with you more. Mary?
Well, I always see this question in terms of what I need to accomplish. And of course, there are many, wonderful projects. We're returning to the Reina Sofia this year with Jaume Plensa, and it's even though he's Spanish, it's his first exhibition in Spain. even though he's 60, and the MACBA. So that's a really great opportunity. And in April, one nice thing about living long, if you're fortunate to do that, is you get to work with curators who you like as they move from museum to museum. And a curator who was at the Hayward, who did a big show of Anna Mendieta, has moved to Martin Kolpiusbau, and her first project is Anna Mendieta in April. So we're really excited about that. But I always really think of what I need to bring home for the artists that don't have those opportunities. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Thank you, Mary. I'd also like to add, for those who aren't as intimately familiar with the Global Fine Art Awards as some of us in the room are, that of the 3 artists Mary mentioned that are nominated this year of the 85, of whom Mary is representing 3, Anna Mendieta and Jaume Plensa are 2. And Jaume Plensa was our Public Art Award winner 2 years ago for his work in the Venice Biennale Together. And again, that was the church I used to go to when I lived in Venice, and then the judges selected it. I had nothing to do with. I don't have anything to do with the judging or the selection process, but I do a lot of the background work. But it was one of the things that really makes it all worth it to see a gentleman like that honored, or a person like that honored for a work that is so incredibly personal to me. It just happens to be from my point of view, but obviously this is what many people will feel, and what we hope in our own small way with this program, that more people will start feeling and connecting with individual artists, with the programs and the curatorial work that's being done, the individual artists in public art, and our broadening of the program to have these 2 new awards, which I don't think I mentioned, are Global Humanity, and the next panel, which Dean Fellis will be leading, is a variation of Global Planet, which has to do with conservation and nature. But these are things, again, that transcend language, time, and space. And we feel, I think, very passionately that by unifying or raising awareness, and thus also having this consortium of voices will help in some way to try to also influence. It's not just having a voice, it's having influence on people who can help make a difference financially, economically, politically, etc. And the voice of art is I feel so strongly about this, must be heard more loudly. And all the work that each one of these panelists is doing deserves an incredible round of applause, please. I thank you deeply for sharing your stories this morning, and they will all be with us this evening, as I know many of you will, and I hope to see you all later today. And does anyone have a pressing question? If not, I think we will, like last time, we are a little pressed for time. Does anyone have an important question that they'd like, or interesting question they'd like to address one of our panelists?
A question to the previous panel.
Well, then, please bring them up with them independently after this panel, okay? Okay, well, thank you so much. You're a great audience, and I'm very much looking forward to our next panel, which will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you so much. So I won't take much of your time, but I do want to introduce our moderator, because he's very modest and probably won't introduce himself appropriately. Our moderator for this 3rd panel is the first person I stalked for GFAA. His name is Dean Fellis. He works for an organization called the American Alliance of Museums, also known as the AAM, which is the institution that does accreditation for museums and is the most unifying institution, nonprofit here in the United States for museums. And I thought, well, if I want to start this program, where should I turn to see if it's a good idea and if they can maybe help? And there on the roster, at the time his title was Global Director of Events and Programs. So I called him, didn't have a website built, and said, "Hi, Dean, my name's Judy. Do you want to come along?" And he said yes. Dean has been a devoted and very involved judge from the day one. So he's gone through 4 years. It's longer than 4 years, but 4 full rounds of judging. The research process and nominating process goes on all year long behind the scenes. And he's also on our executive committee. There are about 13, 14 people this year on our executive committee who are really in the profit world, it's like the board of trustees. So Dean is really, if I died today or got run over by the bus, he could take over. And also, I won't introduce them, but I am equally delighted with each of the four panelists. I know them and I love them, and their work is tremendous. And I am also grateful to judge number 2, Dr. Jo Lynn Hill, who is one of the most interesting and philosophically minded people. I enjoy every conversation I get. A moment of his time is truly a delight. Thank you, Joe, for being here. Erland, Stuart, and Diane. I'll ask Dean to continue in his way of moderating the panel, and thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all this evening in your finery. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Judy. And of course, no one can replace you, so and the wonderful work that you've done in launching this program. So in the inaugural year where we have introduced the Global Planet Award, and during a time when our landscapes are at risk of exhaustion and our natural environments are in peril, we thought it would be a great idea to organize this panel of artists, curators, and museum practitioners who will offer insight on the role that art plays in our understanding of responsibility for and relationship to the natural environment and its sustainability. I'm delighted to have joining us today, and please chime in if I get any of this information wrong, but Diane Tufts, mixed media artist who's primarily focused on photography since 1998. And her work documents the visual effects of climate change and global warming. She is a GFAA nominee this year for the Arctic Melt, which was an exhibition of her recent photographic work that was shown at the Marlborough Gallery. Jolyn Hill is currently Deputy Director of the Albright Knox Gallery in Buffalo, New York, and he served with me as one of the judges for the GFA Awards program this year. Stuart Williams is an artist and architect by training, and he does public art installations that explore thematic, symbolic, and historical intersections between art, technology, nature, and humanity. And his installation, Dresden Cathedral, Breath of Life, Dresden, which marked the 70th anniversary of the bombing of Dresden in World War II, was a GFA nominee in 2015. And I'd also like to introduce Erland Højersen, who is the director of the Aarhus Art Museum in Denmark. And he is also the founding director of the Aarhus Triennial. And the Aarhus Triennial, entitled The Garden, End of Times, Beginning of Times, was an insightful look at the relationship between nature and the environment over time. And it was also a GFAA nominee and finalist this year in the category of Fringe Alternative Exhibitions. So with that being said, the first question that I'd like to ask our panelists is, what role has art played over time in helping us better understand our relationship to and stewardship of the natural environment? I'm going to start with Erland, because your exhibition that you've done with the Triennial has been quite extraordinary in providing a historical context about our relationship to nature over time.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Triennial and why we did it. It was quite a massive, substantial effort from our side. We wanted to do a Triennial that was available for a large group of people, and part of it should be free as well. And we wanted to communicate with people outside the art world. We had more than 500,000 visitors. The main reason why we wanted to do that was because of the topic, our relationship to nature, maybe one of the most crucial topics we could address at these times. And I'm Norwegian, and I'm coming from I'm coming from a country with a lot of nature, and Denmark doesn't have much nature left. I'm sorry to say. Everything is more or less touched by man. I think it's 57% of the total landmass is agriculture. More than 50% is conventional agriculture. That means that more than half of the country is pesticide every year, so to say. And you don't have an untouched nature. And for a Norwegian, that's kind of strange because you have the shores, you have the mountains, and so on. And Norway has a very strong connection to its nature. It's a very big part of its identity. But that identity doesn't go far back. It started in the beginning of the 19th century, actually. And it started with the English coming over, doing hikes in the mountains and trying to understand nature as an aesthetic subject, so to say. But it became very important for the Norwegian identity because of Norwegian artists like Johan Christian Dahle and Fearnley and so on. So, of course, art does something to the way we look upon nature and upon how we look upon ourselves as well. And we also see that what we did with the triennial also changed, in many ways actually, the way the Danes were looking upon their own country. We had a very broad engagement, even the Queen involved in the debate, especially upon one piece by Katarina Grosse that created kind of tension between the museum and the broad public of Denmark.
Joe. Thank you. Can you repeat that question once more?
Okay. What role has art played over time in our better understanding our relationship and stewardship of the natural environment?
Mm-hmm. So I think, just following up on what Erlend was saying, different people's relationships to nature has changed a lot historically. And if you think back to this time when Norway began to conceive itself as its identity as the natural world, that was the case across Europe at the time. And you think about the sort of rising nationalism of the 19th century, it's very much based on place and the notion of nature as a kind of owned thing for a nation. I guess the best example is something like Courbet's work, or no, where you have the so-called Oak of Vercingetorix or something like that. This is about my place in the world. Of course, at that time, there isn't the exploitation of nature that Denmark is suffering from today, and that many of us are suffering from today. And if you think about the displacement of people from nature into urban centers, that also transpires at this time. So historically, I think the relationship to nature is one of nation building and identity building that's transpiring right at the very time that we are losing that direct connection historically. So now we are in a totally different moment. Making work about nature is, and I don't think we meant to separate the institutions from the artists here.
Wasn't it?
That's not the goal, quite at all. But now we live in a time where we're very displaced from nature, and so it's not about painting or photographing or documenting your own nature. It's about going to that place that needs our attention that's far away. I mean, people do go out in their backyard and take photographs or make paintings or things like that, but what we're talking about and what your work is about is a kind of vital reflection on our relationship to nature that's a relationship that didn't exist historically. We hadn't used up the planet in the middle of the 19th century in quite the same way. And so as art, as landscape emerges, as a very, landscape used to be a very lowly genre, and it becomes a much more elevated genre late in the 19th century as, the Impressionists come to fore against the sort of academic tradition. And at the same time, art sort of comes into its own sphere. It becomes dislocated from the natural world, just as we do. So I think we're living in a very different time now, where art's relationship to nature is very different from what it was historically. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Stuart.
Well, I would just say as an environmental artist that I was thinking about this question, and I think that humanity as a whole, people throughout the world as a whole over time, I think there's been a lot of influence on our perception of the natural world, of landscape, and consequently the value we place on nature and the natural world. You could even think back to painters in the time of Da Vinci, just the background, the painting of the Mona Lisa, and the very interesting background behind her, which I've always found sort of intriguing. Then Van Gogh, Cézanne, Monet, Turner, painters who are known for painting the landscape at various times in their career. And even Diebenkorn, his abstractions of the California coast, and the colors, those aquas and greens that he used so beautifully. And I even think of Wayne Thiebaud and his almost surreal interpretations of the landscape of San Francisco. They're urban paintings, but they're also about the unique and almost shocking severity of the hills in that city, and he exaggerates them in a way that is almost in another realm of perception from what as to how you experience them in person. And then, of course, landscape photographers like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. And then the site artists of the 60s, like Walter Di Maria and Lightning Field, Smithson, Spiral Jetty, Nancy Holt, Michael Heiser, Christo, Jean-Claude. I think of Running Fence in particular, that beautiful white ribbon that ran for, 20-some miles through Sonoma and Napa counties that really, I think, drew attention to the beauty of those rolling sand dune-like hills and allowed people to see them in a new way. And then Andy Goldsworthy, of course, Maya Lin. So I think through time that our perception as a civilization, or as various civilizations through history, has been very influenced by the visual arts, both in three-dimensional formats and two-dimensional formats of painting.
Diane.
Well, it is interesting that we have to sort of recreate landscape, and that in the United States, I mean, we've preserved some parks, right, which are natural and unfortunately want to be taken away from us. So my whole purpose is to go and seek out landscape that hasn't been touched. So it's very interesting that you brought that up. And I think that for me, I grew up in very rural areas, so that landscape was my playground. And I loved it, and it was very personal to me. And in a few years, that playground became a development, became row houses. So I think we really aren't appreciating landscape, and it is extremely important. I was just discussing the fact that I think we're kind of overlapping what we were just talking about with humanity, because our landscape is disappearing, and it's disappearing and causing a lot of unrest in the world. So there's a lot of overlap between political and economic upheaval and what's happening with our landscape. The visual communication of art, I don't think, can be reproduced any other way. And we had the same list, I guess. So I was talking about Vincent van Gogh. I mean, Starry Night, how he took a star and made it radiate, and the wind sort of swirled. So that's nothing he saw, but it's something that he felt that he put on the canvas, and the Hudson River painters, where we were so insignificant in terms of this huge scale of landscape. And the Chinese artist Shen Zhu, who creates landscapes that just create a feeling, a brushstroke. And Rothko, Rothko's a landscape painter, and he, took these colors and had them like vibrate next to one another to sort of make some sort of horizon that you didn't know was going to exist. So I think that that the visual representation of landscape in a communication with the public is one way for us to really understand that it's a very, very important subject matter that we really need to pay attention to.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to start down here again with you, Diana, on the next question. So in what way does your work help influence or convey a greater awareness of the importance of environmental sustainability? Because I certainly think it does.
Right. So my last series, I've been doing this since 1998, but the last series I decided that knowing that the Arctic ice was disappearing and what that was going to happen, what cause and effect that was going to have on our world was really important for me to record. And so I decided that there are three things that will cause ocean rise, which is going to cause flooding all over the world, which will displace people in Bangladesh, will displace people in New York. Most people live on coastal areas, so it's a very important subject to have approached. And the three factors that will cause ocean rise are melting of the mountain glaciers, the thermal expansion of the ocean, and the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. And those are all really occurring very quickly in the Arctic. So I decided that I would take 2 years and basically go to the northernmost mountain glacier, which is Svalbard, Norway, which is halfway between the northernmost part of Norway and the North Pole. It's an archipelago in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, which has mountain glaciers. And if those were melting, certainly a lot of others were melting. Photograph those, photograph the Arctic Ocean. I had seen satellite images, read a lot of scientific data, but there's really nothing that would substitute me physically being on the ocean and seeing what was going on. So I took a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker from Murmansk, Russia, up to the North Pole and back in order to document what was happening on the Arctic Ocean, and then revisited Greenland after 9 years to see what was happening in Greenland. And everything I saw was, yes.
I wanted to interject something.
I'm sorry.
Because everyone's a little, listening to this is fabulous, but
I should shorter.
No, I want to picture this incredible woman in the Arctic, in submarines, going up mountains, doing the incredible extreme condition documentation of our planet. Doesn't she deserve a round of applause?
Thank you.
Please do her work because it is absolutely spectacular. Not only is it important in its messaging, but the beauty of what she does is truly remarkable. And as a woman who has a family and a lot of other things going on in her life, to make it her mission to document what's happening in the world of the world, I just think is one of the most admirable things that anyone can do.
Thank you, Judy. That's very sweet. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, so I have to say that every part of that journey was shocking to me. I did not expect that the mountain glaciers in Svalbard would have meltwater ponds on them. I did not expect that the Arctic Ocean would not have that much ice. We got to the North Pole, it was 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ice was too thin to get out. We had to actually go in the area for a piece of ice that was thick enough for us to disembark so we could say we stood around the North Pole. And then Greenland, as I said, I had revisited. It's only 9 years. Now there were like meltwater ponds and lakes so deep that there were actually divers in Ilulissat that were going to be diving in the lakes in the Greenland ice sheet. The calving of the glaciers, which causes all these big icebergs that you can picture in Disco Bay in Greenland, they used to be like 150 feet, beautiful. I mean, you almost didn't know if you were next to a glacier or an iceberg. Now they were like little teeny ones because the glaciers were calving so quickly. Some of the glaciers had receded so far that there were no longer icebergs breaking off. They were now just crumbling snow that were, dyed with the color of the bedrock underneath. So it was really shocking to me, and I can't make a ugly photograph, so they're all really gorgeous photographs, but each one has something that talks about the environment, and I think by bringing it to the public, to a museum and to galleries, to talk about, what is the scale of this, why does it look like this, it becomes a dialogue that will then continue, hopefully, to influence our politicians or to make people more aware, to be more proactive.
Great.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Move along.
Stuart?
The largest project I've ever done was in Northern California, about 50 miles north of San Francisco, in a series of hills, similar to Christo's site for Running Fence, and not too far from it. It was an array of nearly 2,000 4-foot energy-efficient fluorescent lamps arrayed in a huge square grid formation that covered an area equal to 8 football fields. And the entire array was elevated about 18 inches above the ground, electrified, so this glowing green grid following the contours of the landscape. So I saw it as a kind of poetic statement about the potential and necessary harmony between humanity, between technology and nature. And that was 25 years ago, but it remains a showcase piece in my body of work, partly because of its scale. It took 5 years to raise the funds, and it was an artist-driven project. In any case, the image itself, someone compared it to, one of the viewers compared it to, he said, it looks like an enormous electronic doily. And I thought that was a nice comparison. I thought of it more as if you're familiar with the wireframe grid, which is an icon of computer imaging technology, it goes way back to the 70s, the 80s. You see sonar maps of the ocean floor, a warped grid, which tells you instantly, you know what a flat grid looks like. So when you see a warped grid, you understand the topography just by looking at that wireframe grid in its new shape. So this was like a wireframe grid, glowing, but come to life on an actual landscape, 10 acres in size. And my hope was that it would make people see that landscape in a way they never had before and think about, okay, here we are, humans on Earth, and we're changing things. Our technology is becoming more complex, more complicated, more omnipresent. Nature is disappearing. The glaciers are melting. The climate is changing. Even then, again, 25 years ago, there wasn't as much talk about climate change as there is now. But I'm proud of that piece because I think that it was really speaking to something that was and is very important in how humanity, how humans and the natural world interact, and it's got to be in some kind of harmonious, respectful manner, or else we have a big problem. And,
exactly.
And you are seeing the results of that problem in your work.
Exactly.
On my left. Response, Harlan?
Yeah, I can start out. Because I think, for example, what we're doing at the museum, like an institution, we're not only an art museum, we also are institution for knowledge, a place where people will gather and talk together. And I think that gives us another opportunity. Very often I try to describe ours as a mental fitness center. It's somewhere you come to train your mental ability, but also your attitude. Because I think when it comes to environmental issues, it's not only about knowledge, it's also about attitude. We try to, I think one of the most important things we can give our audience or public and such is to understand the difference between being passive recipients or active participants. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have so many visitors, that people actually understanding that what we're trying to do is not only to be trying to create great exhibitions and energy and creating energy into the city, but also trying to change the mentality of the city and the mentality of Denmark and so on. And I have a very specific kind of activistic approach towards art. In general, you say that art shouldn't mean anything, institutions should reflect change, but I think an institution like ours should try to affect change as well. Otherwise, we will meet and face big problems. And when you were talking about Greenland, sometimes you forget, for example, the Nordic countries, how far north they are. And if you compare it to New York is the longitude of Rome. Yeah. And if you go directly west from Norway and Denmark, you end up in south of Greenland or even like Canada. And what people are kind of being more and more aware of now is one thing is that the poles are melting, but what we are afraid of is that the cold water will push away the Gulf Stream, and if the Gulf Stream changes completely its current, in a couple of years we will have a new ice age in Europe. It takes approximately.
Didn't you just recently had
it?
Yeah. Cold spell.
Huge.
Yeah. So I think again, it's not only about the art, but also the attitude towards art and how the institutions can play a vital role, or if they decide to play a vital role or not. And I think these kind of art institutions that I am representing should also try to play a much more important role than I used to do, and try to address not only the art and traditional art audience, but also a wide variety of people.
So going back to you then, so how has your understanding of the environment changed or grown through the course of the work that you've done at the museum?
Well, first of all, starting working with the garden and then the triennial brought a high awareness to the museum and the institution as such. In general, there's a kind of high awareness. But I found it also kind of interesting that, for example, you had environmental organizations that said that it occurred a kind of debate. The triennial created a very big debate especially on social media. But they said that what the institution, what the artists have been communicating in the last 2 days, have they tried to achieve for 20 years. So what I think is very interesting with art is that it has the ability to touch feelings and emotions and etc., and has an extremely high potential for reaching out. And that's what surprised me, that art has the ability to communicate to everybody. That's a fantastic power tool.
Can I just make a comment? What you just said about the power to reach everyone. The light grid project I just described was adjacent to one of the major freeways north of San Francisco, so tens of thousands of people drove by every day. It was highly visible. And every night when it was at its greatest visibility, we had created hundreds of temporary parking spaces, and people would stop just having no idea what it was. And I remember being approached, so what is this? Is this some kind of agricultural experiment? because of the whole, this grid work of lights. They didn't even know that it was supposed to be art. But then I would explain what I saw the message of it being, and the reason I did it is it seemed as a poetic statement, technology, nature coming together. People reacted very positively. Even these are people who are not necessarily museum goers or visitors to art galleries or even necessarily interested in the arts. But what really amazed me and was so gratifying is that across the board, most people were very positive and very interested. Mm-hmm. That was very gratifying. Pardon?
I think that what you're bringing up, Stuart, is an important difference between public art and its reception and, say, museum art. Mm-hmm. Not that they're different, but the context in which you discover, learn about, embrace the work of art, whether it's on a grand scale of 10 acres or, the size of a postage stamp, is very much influenced by the setting.
Yes.
And lacking the sort of didactic material that bores us all at museums, it's a magical experience to drive up and see a 10-acre illuminated field, right? Sometimes the didactics take away from the magic of the experience, but sometimes it's that framing that allows for your work to be contextualized as important, right? Mm-hmm. It's much easier for an artist, you use the phrase, artist-driven projects. It's much easier for artists to get on to, a submarine and go to the North Pole than it is for an institution to do that. There are ways that institutions, I think both of us would say that what we're doing is trying to enable and frame the work of artists so that it communicates as transparently and with the greatest impact possible. That's sort of, and that's, I think, your mental fitness center, that's a very apt phrase for what I think museums should be doing today, which is they should be participating in contemporary conversations. It's easy for me to say because, I help run a Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. So we have an innovation lab that has, pretensions to doing things like these very panel discussions we're having right here, to be a source of, just like you're saying, to be a site where contemporary discussions are housed. I think that's our responsibility. But I also think it's kind of everyone's responsibility, right? It's, representing an institution, it doesn't happen without your interest in these things. The institution doesn't go in that way. Similarly, institutions are just made of people. And it's sort of like Mary was saying earlier about all of us need to approach everyone with kindness. And that's kind of like, we have a responsibility to be political and to work for the greater good. But I don't have that, it's like Donald Judd once said, artists do have the responsibility to be political, and so do dentists.
That's a good quote. So Diane, did you want to, because obviously I'd like to know how your perspective has changed.
With the environment?
Yes.
Yeah. So I described before that it was much worse than I had expected. But through the art, I've actually gotten much more involved in a lot of non-for-profit environmental organizations. Actually, today at 1:30, I'm meeting a man for the third time who's part of something called Echo America. And he does something very interesting, bringing environmental issues into Middle America. And through churches, actually. Because evidently, Sunday, most of America is in church. And the pastors have a very good relationship with their parish. So by speaking through the churches, they can get local people to understand that clean water is really important, clean air is very important. It affects them personally. So through my art, I've actually reached out to the NRDC, Conservation International, many organizations that are very interested in conservation. So it's really given me a very large platform. Well, I was going to discuss museums later, but actually the statistic is that there were 850 million visits each year to American museums, more than any major league sporting event.
Right.
So museums are so important in terms of exposing people to what's happening. And more museums are becoming more climate involved. Now there's that climate museum that's opening up in Oslo and your museum. And so I think it's very important that it continues. That's all.
Actually, there's one that's being tested out here.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. I was there in the beginning when she was thinking about that, and I'm like, I would really like to help you, but nothing really has happened. She has a show at Parsons. I know.
You know, I think that's one of the problems too. This goes back to the distinction between the public art and the museum. You know, there's a museum for everything.
Right.
You know, there's a museum for everything in the world. It's sort of like you take this problem, you stick it over here in this box and call it a museum. When really what we're trying to do is affect change with individual people and get them to understand and walk out the door and be different, right? So this is, I think, one of the frustrations that anyone who's running an institution has, and to some degree or another. We put on an exhibition and then it goes away.
Right.
And, you know, we're doing Murakami this week, and then we're doing nature next week, and we're doing, you know, minimalism this week, and then we're going to do refugees that week. I mean, it's kind of, there's so many issues like this that I find we're constrained in terms of what we can program, and that's one reason we have a public art initiative, so we can do other things beyond this box and try to affect change like this. But it's a concern that somehow there's a source that is this institution, and okay, now that we have that institution, we can go there and sort of pay homage to the problem without actually taking it upon ourselves to be engaged and fix the problem. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what actions would you like to see museums or artists take as a whole to advance change in our responsibility to and protection of the natural environment?
God, I just really set myself up for that one. Jesus. How about you, Aaron? You want to take that one?
Can I respond to your answer? No, but I think in general, institutions have become more political, more activistic, and have a clear attitude and a clear idea of what they want to do. When the subtitle of the triennial was "The End of Times, the Beginning of Times," it also has a kind of a subtle message in that, because we are in the brink of something new, and we have to let something go. The problem of institutions are that they are very, as an art institutions, always talk about like challenging the audience, but the last thing they do is challenging themselves. Well, I find it very interesting. And I think institutions should try to reinvent themselves and try to bring forward a new way of thinking themselves as a part of the society and not only the academic society. But that also goes back to the university and how you are taught to be an art historian, etc., etc. So, yeah, I think institutions should try to dare and fail much more than they do.
So, yeah, I think my observation has been, not only on this issue, but on a lot of social issues, are that museums are very good at providing an understanding, but it stops there. Yeah. And it's ultimately, what do you want people to do? How do you want to inspire action in your museum or with the visitors who are coming to your museum to actually affect the change that needs to happen?
Yeah, it's also like when your mission, I mean, we don't explicitly have edutainment in our mission statements. I don't think any of us would. But you're supposed to be also at the same time providing a kind of entertaining experience that is simultaneously, educational to the extent that some thing with which you're very discomfortable in the world you embrace as your own. This is not an easy thing to give a bitter pill and make people feel really happy about it. But I think Adelaine's quite right. I mean, we're very much on the same wavelength. We have to be a place where difficult conversations take place and have a voice. It's very difficult in our country. We are not publicly funded institutions. There's a need for neutrality in all sorts of things. Fortunately, we haven't had to do an exhibition on contemporary thoughts about climate change. God knows that would be difficult to maintain any sort of neutrality because it's so patently obvious. We need to be able to make statements that are that have a political character and back them up.
But I think it's very important for institutions to not only do the talk, but also the walk.
Exactly.
And also bringing it down to like the kitchen instead of organic food, that sustainability is on the agenda. For example, I'm not quite sure, but I think we have almost 40% of our energy resources come from windmill, etc. But at the same time, last year we had 20% public funding. The sponsor situation in Denmark is not as good as in America, or in the States at least. So we highly depending on people wanting to come and kind of fundraising our next project by buying tickets, etc. But last year we had, including the triennial, 1.5 million visitors, and that's within a city with 320,000 inhabitants. And we have an attitude, and I think people like that kind of attitude because people want to sit next to somebody else around the campfire and listen to great stories. If we were only depending on the public funding and sponsors and so on, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. But what we're trying to do is communicate, and we are storytellers. And I think museums should embrace that, being storytellers for the future to come.
I have just a question. So, encountering the museum world, there's two things. Number one, how political can you get? A lot of funding comes from the government. So I had a situation where I wanted to, years ago, exhibit my work, which was quite environmental, about climate change, and the museum I was talking about, I'm not going to repeat it, did not want to get involved in the political situation because they were being funded by the government, and so far climate change hasn't been proved. And the other thing is that, so we're very involved in the Whitney, and they've had many exhibits that have been very politically charged, and it actually works for the advantage of the Whitney because there's people picketing and all things that are happening, and so it draws a crowd. But I think the public funding of a museum is a little difficult, and I don't know how you draw the line on that. How far can you push it?
Well, 75% of museums in the United States don't receive public funding.
Right.
75%.
Because it's a completely different context here. I mean,
right.
Scandinavia is in general more open, to put the situation euphemistically, about the notion of climate change.
Well, Denmark's going to be completely but they have already. By what year will you not be dependent on any oil or fossil fuels? Like 2025 or something?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, you're way ahead of it.
So you're way ahead.
Yeah.
We're talking about the United States of America.
But the point is, for example, when we talk about the garden, the triennial, we don't conclude with that. We're not making any conclusion. It's more about like making people active participants. And I think we try to avoid being political in the sense that the world is black and white.
Right.
You see, and where we say this is right and this is wrong. We don't want to do exhibitions like that because, first of all, they're quite boring.
Right.
And second of all, we might also be in a situation where we are actually on the wrong side of the right decisions, etc. But I think we want to be political, but in a kind of essayistic way, if you understand what I mean, where we want to involve people, not tell them what is right and what is wrong.
Okay.
Right. I actually think, though, where the challenge is that when you have exhibitions on the environment, how it's changing, and they're really having an impact on you as a visitor, you want to know what to do next. And museums typically aren't providing the resources or direction as part of that exhibition in order to give people directions on what to do next in order to help change or advance it.
Yeah, because we're ill-equipped to do that. That is to say, we may be at the center of public discourse, but and we may be, branché in a number of different ways based on our boards and our collaborations and the like. But if we provide the kind of, okay, take this information to the next step, personalize it, and become a political human being rather than a couch potato, we may have crossed the line of what is our responsibility to do. Nevertheless, that is the goal and the ambition that we have. So, in a certain sense, you have to have collaborators for exhibitions and for initiatives and things like that are of a more sustained variety that, put our framing device with the additional kind of impact. I mean, that's the sort of model that I could see that would work better for us. Not displacing the responsibility, but, you can only do so much, right?
Right. I actually think that one of the issues here, though, is you're not forcing your visitors to take action. You're giving them options.
Right.
So in that way, you are neutral. They don't have to go away from their experience saying that they're going to do anything about it. But there are other people that will be visiting who will want to do something about it and don't know where to go.
Right. Some brochures at the exit.
Well, we do our visitor exit surveys, right? And the goal is that your visitor says this was a really rewarding and meaningful and relevant experience. Maybe there is some way to do something different upon exit that invites a continuing dialogue. I think museums are. We don't want to just be repositories of objects, but we have a responsibility to our permanent collections, or at least we do at the Albert Knox. But then there's an episodic quality to temporary exhibitions, as I was just mentioning. So it's hard to sustain the dialogue and conversation over time around different issues so that you can be a site of sustained engagement. And that is one reason why we are trying to find ways to have like an ideas lab that is just staging conversations that don't necessarily have anything to do with contemporary art, aside from the fact that they are contemporary and they are problems that need solutions.
And I also think it's wrong to say that describe a museum for doing a show on environmental issues for neutral. I think because even though we don't want to make people to choose, even though we're not for example the garden again, we're not saying somebody is talking about the environment. We're saying we are talking about the environment, and by that we're not neutral. We are choosing the subjects to debate. So, but of course we could also strive to be more giving public service. Do you want to read more? You should go here. You should go to that organization and so on. We could do that in general much better, of course.
Is that a conflict of interest for a museum to do? Because I agree completely. I mean, I myself had to search out which environmental firms, not-for-profits, would I like to be involved in. I had to read. I had to go to the internet, the best ones, reach out to them, and it would be a very good thing for many of these non-for-profits to have some sort of information in the museum where people they say, I really want to learn more about this. It doesn't happen. I don't know why not.
That's envisioning theoretically.
But in particular, that would be an environmental display, but minimalism or whatever you're doing.
This is sort of the museum as library, in a
right?
sense, as a repository of knowledge of all different kinds of subjects,
right.
and somehow the museum is the civic space where exciting events and beautiful things and great ideas all come together. I think we all aspire to that. I don't think it's a conflict of interest in any way, but I think it is a movement away from looking at museums as repositories of old objects or famous objects or beautiful objects or whatever they are, towards an active civic role that is beyond its walls. And that's a challenging institutional transformation that I think has to take place, because as a repository of objects that is the encyclopedia of art or whatever it is, there's a sort of sense of the authority is located within the museum, right? We are authoritative on this subject, but our engagement with the subject ends here at the end of the exhibition, right? So it's a different kind of thinking about what is the museum to do.
Right. I think that, and I'll just close with this last statement, but at a time when, certainly in the United States, where people are looking to institutions and to support institutions that can provide social impact, if museums want to continue to be relevant, they better be on board. Mm-hmm. So, are there any questions for our distinguished panels? No, they've answered it all.
What?
Museums are not neutral.
No.
They're just by their choices.
Right.
But why we decide to have an exhibition or how we approach something. We don't have or avoiding something, that means they're taking a stand. So that neutrality idea, I don't know.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us for this last panel. It's been a great conversation. We'll see you tonight.
And thanks to K&L Gates for hosting these panels.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Really.